Hello, and welcome to the Scientist Sage Sangha. This is Wise Heart Wellness, and I'm Nancy Anderson Dolan. And I'm so thankful that you're here with us tonight live or watching this at some other time to discover and explore these interesting topics. This topic of othering has been the subject of a couple of emails because it is so deep. And the idea of othering has been talked a lot about lately because there's so much going on in our society that is about this othering. And othering, as I'm going to talk about it, is just a way of putting distance between yourself and other people and involves sort of seeing others as different than us and in a way that's generally more negative or insufficient. And we can also other ourselves in the same way, though, and telling ourselves like we're not like other people, that and we maybe can't be like them because we have these negative and insufficient ways about us. And so this idea of, people having lack or ourselves having lack or inadequate or things like that, it's not like a new idea. This started way back with primitive tribes, with primitive brains, and it was a way of survival. It was a survival mandate. Like, how am I going to survive? If that person coming across, that cave person coming across the land is going to take what I have, I won't be able to survive. And so these othering ideas helped tribes survive and do things. And they grew as travel expanded, as tribes could travel further, because the more powerful tribes, they conquered other ones. And so it truly was survival of the strongest and smartest. And they saw themselves, of course, as better and more worthy, and that allowed them to treat others as less worthy and less human even. And that basic start carried on even as differing philosophies and religions and spiritual paths emerged. And that othering through those pathways, it fed the idea of things like being thrown out of the garden, this idea of our basic badness. And that changed things too, as people told stories to make other people less than and those sorts of things. And it moved away from being really physically powerful and able to, beat somebody else with a stick. It moved into ideas of making other people bad. So this idea of basic badness got handed around through different traditions, and that idea still is with us, thousands of years later. But our brains were also evolving. And so a part of that evolution was having the ideas that entertained equality. And so the equality idea started to move forward, that, maybe people were equal and not better or worse than other people. But remember, it's fighting against a lizard brain, survival security part of the brain that started the whole othering thing. And so it's never easy and it's never permanent to change those old survival security inspired ideas way down in that reptile brain. And so even though different schools of thought and evolved with our brains evolving more prefrontal cortex so we could contemplate things and consider other people and consider ideas that, broadly people are all equal. And so we have a belief, at least out there, that all humans are deserving of equal respect, and it's there. And people at least generally give it lip service in company. But really, we don't, I think we underestimate how entrenched and impactful and embraced and easily triggered the othering still is. Because I don't think many of us appreciate the subtlety of it. The subtlety of it gets into our very bones, and we've carried it for thousands of years. And our families have carried it, and our tribes have carried it. And there's lots of things going on, and there's tremendous suffering about it, generationally and collaterally. Like, even if I am not somebody who is pressing somebody else and being other and making them smaller, if I see that happening in my world, I don't feel good, and I might feel bad about me. And so if I feel bad about me, I'm on the way to the basement where I store my primal brain, where I'm going to get afraid and fall back to security kind of concerns. And is there going to be enough for me? And is it safe really out in the world? And are some of those people out in the world not safe people to be around? So it's a loop that none of us escape, none of us. And so the idea of it, I think about one of the things that I find it occurring a lot in is the issue of size. And so on one sort of view of it, size is like strength and power and that sort of thing. And we generally have a lot of respect for people that are strong and powerful. And that means when we see people that are weak and not powerful, we actually have a different thing go off in our brain. And we may not acknowledge that. But people, it's shown in research that people respond differently to people of different body size. And then more recently, and not recently in the terms of decades, but recently in terms of, last 100 or 200 years, size matters. And in some cultures, it mattered to be big. You were rich if you were overweight, if you were heavy. But in a lot of cultures, oversize was frowned on. And the idea of being weak or not able to control oneself, and all sorts of crazy stuff grew up around it. And Tara Brach talks about a lovely story about a woman said to her, I've been walking for the last 15 minutes down the sidewalk in New York, assessing if people are in better shape than me or bigger than me or smaller than me. And then the woman says at the end, excuse me, did I say 15 minutes? I meant 15 years. And the size thing can have a huge thing. Children as young as 5 can have issues about their size. And so they may not have been othered directly, but that's some of that collateral stuff that they've seen going on around them. And so this spreads like a virus. And so the othering part about how we either build ourselves up or take ourselves down, or build up others or take them down, is so insidious. And it can be so subtle, like not having books that reflect all the people in a society. They only reflect a part of the society. Or a lot of books that reflect things that are ideal in society, but are not real. And so, if you've ever read a lot of romance books, things like that, lots of, not real things out there. Or the sitcoms that came out and solved all the family's problems within 30 minutes. Those kinds of things that we see like that are not real. And so all of that kind of thing, and the toll both on the person in a group that is heavily othered. I was at a talk where someone from a Middle Eastern country was talking about she didn't go shopping after dark because she was afraid to walk through the parking lots because she was a visible minority. And she had people other her, attack in that way out in public in the middle of the day. So she changed how she lived in the world. And for us to have that going on in the world that we live in is troubling for us as well, whether we are actively doing that or supporting it. So there's this big collateral damage circle. And all of those kinds of things. And right now, it's interesting in our society because the scrutiny of this othering is increasing. People are going, that's crazy. That's not right. That they're going back in history and saying, the reconciliation process with Indigenous peoples or with Black people that were forced to be slaves, things like all sorts of things like that. As that heats up, and the scrutiny of the othering comes, the fight for it to maintain it is also increasing. And it's a really interesting, difficult time to see all this. And right now, as there's so much stress and fear, and it's caused by so many things. You know, the pandemic kept people under wraps and fearful for 2 solid years. And the idea of the war in our country, or the war in the world, it may not be in our country, but the idea that there can be a big war like that happening, and all sorts of things, political unrest where we don't have certainty about things, the economic uncertainty, not knowing how much you're going to have to pay for groceries next week, all sorts of things underlying that, it really can have this effect of taking us back to that primal brain. And we may fight that by not leaving our homes, or we may fight that by working differently. So there are sort of divisive kinds of things happening here, where people are moving one way, where they see it's like, this could bring us together to fight climate change, to support positive interventions, to make it through the pandemic together. All sorts of things came up to do those kinds of things. But it also creates divisiveness on the other side of things, because of all this stress for such a long time over so many things. Because if it's just one thing, we don't get as much chronic stress. We don't flip into survival mode from one thing for a small time, but so many things in so many times that we know about. That's the other big thing that we know about, because if we don't know about them and they're happening, there's some energy in the world that feels different, but it's not the same thing as knowing about them. And so all sorts of interesting things like that are happening. And some people, like I say, definitely see those things as a reason to recognize our basic connectedness. And they're investigating their own othering and taking it apart and being connected more. But either side of that doesn't happen without conscious intention. And so people might literally have that fearfulness and then decide based on that fear, but deciding from the primal brain, not the bigger conscious brain, deciding that all of those people or that kind of thing is a problem. And I may decide, okay, I got to really look at my othering, and I may dip my toe in the water and be utterly overwhelmed by how much othering I do to myself or to other people, or just the mix of all of it. Because people want to feel secure. We want to feel in control with some certainty. But when we don't have that, there is this sort of natural wave of suspicion and even contempt for others. And then we see things like savior complexes as a result of staying in that process, like Putin and Trump. But it was there before, like the war on drugs. It was like, we're going to do this, and this us, them, and somebody has to be saved or stopped, or those kinds of things. But when we're in this twist, it twists the truth and the basic sort of tenets of civil society, like the idea of free speech and how that has gotten so twisted all over the place by so many people. That is a basic good tenet of civil society, but in these odd times, it has got really twisted, even what justice might be, or things like ideas like democracy. And it doesn't mean that those are not good or they're all good. It just means that the basic sort of agreements that we've had in society are being exposed as not such big agreements anymore. And it moves it to a dualistic good or bad, either or, us, them. It moves it to that kind of a place, which is really hard. The othering thrives on that. That's like fertilizer for othering. And even, like looking at Putin with the war right now, it's really hard not to other that, really hard. And so we're in this place where everything is changing and facts are being sort of sculpted to serve temporary security needs. And that doesn't matter whether it's in me personally or as I see politicians or all sorts of people, doing that as well. So it's really challenging. And a lot of what I'm going to call circular values, meaning those are our values or practices or ideas that create expanding positive outcomes for the majority of people. And they're lost or twisted or ignored or even actually seen as bad. Things like reverence for life. And our society has moved away from reverence for life in many, many ways for a very long time, like taking resources from the planet and having this othering of people, like the Europeans coming to North America and subsuming the indigenous people. But as reverence for life comes back, it has to be spread all the way through. And it is circular because the more reverence I have for life, I help more people. And there's less people that are othered. So it literally brings people into the circle as well. And the idea of respect. And in our culture right now, there is an idea that respect is outdated value. But if we don't have that respect for others with a curiosity and a valuing, despite differences, then it's really hard to navigate the world's feeling secure. And having, respect, say, for someone's boundaries, it could be as simple as, a one-to-one person interaction, or it can be as big as a whole generation, not respecting another whole generation, or a whole country of people not respecting another country of people. And so these are real basic things. Compassion, actually being willing to feel what others are feeling. This is a challenge. When we are feeling frightened, we don't want to feel what other people are feeling. When we're feeling bad, we don't want to feel what we're feeling, much less move down through those feelings to see what somebody else is feeling. One of the things that came up in the last few years is separating children and parents when they were crossing the border into the US, and they were literally kept in different cages. And when people saw that, it was overwhelming. And many people just needed to turn away because they didn't know what they could do. They couldn't handle the feeling of it. And it was overwhelming. So the more we see overwhelming things like that, where our compassion fatigue happens, or I don't know about anybody else that's listening, but locked in my house with my family for an extended period of time, my compassion had a little bit of wavering, I'll say, except for the time I would shut myself in a private room for a period of time and let it come back. So these are really real things that are happening in the world right now. And for most of us, and not just, in a few places, but for a lot of us in many, many places and in many situations, even the connection. And one of the things that happened during the COVID issues were we lost a lot of human connection, and lots of people report having lots of trouble getting back to it. And they wanted it, but they were overwhelmed. And there were lots of interesting things like that happened for people. They were content, far more content to stay in their own homes for long periods of time, where before they wouldn't do that. So there was an interesting shift with connection. And that connection is so important for us to not be othering. Because if I don't have connection, that basic desire to initiate and maintain and explore connections on a deeper level, I have some stuff going on. At base, we long to belong. Lots of us have moved into unwellness and illness and addiction, and move into isolation with all of those kinds of things. depression, all of those things. But there's that longing to belong at the bottom. And that is often what really hampers mental health, when we are not attending to our longing to belong and developing connection. And assessing the world around us and the people around us as too much work or too much risk to connect. So lots of othering happens in that way. If I assess people as too difficult or too risky to try and connect with, I am othering them and me. I don't have the ability, or I don't have the willingness, or um, fortitude, we'll say, to navigate connection with other people. Then I'm a different kind of person. Somebody else has that, but I don't. And the ability to reflection, contemplating life and its unfolding. And this has been going on for like thousands and thousands of years. But when we are in survival mode, we don't do that as much. We ruminate as opposed to reflect. So rumination is, it's a road to nowhere, basically. It's not that circular. I reflect and I go, I don't like how I'm behaving. I wonder how I could do that different. Or a reflection like, I'm not making choices that make me happy. I wonder what I could do different. That's a circular kind of thing. And that's how you can identify reflection from rumination. Rumination doesn't move in that expanding circular way. So all of these kinds of things lead to the othering. And the overcoming it is more what I want to guide people towards. And there's been a lot of suggestions in the emails that have gone out in the last 2 weeks, those kinds of things. But basically, it's a desire and an intention and a practice. It's that simple. And the first desire part that is a little challenging to overcome for a lot of us is we need self-honesty and self-awareness. And we have to see where we're doing it to know how to change it. And if I'm in a security mode, it's hard to do that. And so being honest about I'm in a security mode is a useful thing. That if we feel down through our stuff first, and then we feel our own goodness, we can develop a theory, at least in our heads, of other people having basic goodness. But it's hard to find it in other people without the basic experience of feeling our own goodness. And so the overwhelming feelings that have come along in the last while as well can push us into othering and saying it's not safe out there. Other people are not safe. I'm not able to feel these feelings. I'm not able to move through them. And those kinds of things get in the way of having that intention. So this idea, if we can understand our brain's operation at this moment, just as being survival brain born and culturally conditioned behavior that we could have avoided if we wanted to. It's not like we chose to go down these paths of othering. They're just part of our world. And it can be this really great adventure to stop othering and go into the flow of goodness in the world, both finding it and initiating it. And one of the things I did with my young boys when they were littler, we would get on our rapid transit and we would smile at everybody and see what happened. And so what happened was they would smile and people would go, oh, these sweet little boys, and smile back at them. And it was wonderful. And my children would actually say, Mama, that lady didn't smile. Like, what's wrong with them? Are they okay? And so they got this sense that they had this goodness to share, and they got a mostly positive feedback loop with it going. So it was fun. It was fun to see how many people we could have smile at us. It was fun to be kind. People will tell you my boys are some of the kindest young men they will ever meet. And it's because we practice that. It's a practice to connect with other people and not have them be other than us. And it was not easy for me to do that because I had a lot of fear of other people in my life. And so I wanted to make sure my children had less of that. And I would consciously do little practices like the bus thing and train them to reach out in that way. So we can train ourselves and we can connect that way. And it's still today in my body. I have that moment. I was at a physiotherapy appointment today, and someone sat down beside me, and she had her crutches, and I was moving mine out of the way so she could sit down, and we sort of laughed about that. And um, then I really wanted to say something to her to connect a little further, but I was having a fight in myself about saying something. And I just sat for a moment and felt that resistance to opening up and connecting. And then I sort of turned towards her. And at that moment, she turned towards me and said something. And we had a very interesting, helpful conversation because I had lost one of my crutches and she had some suggestions about where to get another one. And so it is that being willing to explore that goodness, share that goodness, hold that goodness, and believe in that goodness that helps to stop othering, because we cannot put ourselves in someone else's place who has been othered in ways we might not have been, but we can feel when we other people and work on breaking down those kind of patterns and opening up in other ways. And then the understanding of other people and the connecting with other people starts to flow in, like when there is a gate opening in a river to have things move forward. And so that sort of thing is a really great way to start. And it's us also being conscious enough and attached or conscious enough to our goodness that we can see what we might call bad behavior. Maybe we've been othering other people, having judgments of other people, and we can see that and not lose faith in ourselves and not feel bad in like I'm a bad person because I do this. I am shocked every time when I notice myself judging people. I'm like, what are you doing judging that person? But I go, oh, right. That's what people that have had survival brain experiences do a lot of. I'm one of those people. So I'm going to see that. And I can go, wow, look at, I noticed my judging. And I noticed my judging, that should count for bonus points. And so we can notice those things without going down the tunnel, and even without being willing to change them at that moment. I think this is really important too, because sometimes that othering is protective. And if we force ourselves just to change it, to not do the exploration, to not reflect on it, we can actually put ourselves more into survival brain and sort of harden our ways of seeing the world instead of expand them and soften them. So these ideas here, we want to be conscious that we do these things because everybody does, but we also want to be conscious about seeing the identification with others and seeing the good in ourselves and other people and embed it in our what I might call inner search engine. Because if I don't embed a quest for my brain goes about running on the old patterns, on the old requests. And so I want to put in a new request and hit the button and have this inner search engine pay attention on this way. So we're going to stop here, and I'm going to just do a really quick, short reflection. And what I want you to do is relax. And relaxing is the first part about how do I open the door on this othering. And that's how do I tolerate other people othering me? Whether it's my othering that I want to take a look at, doesn't matter. Relaxing is always the first thing. So just take a few breaths and stay here. And just notice what might come to mind as the first occurrence of othering. Is it something just that you have othered yourself? Or is it an othering like my noticing, my judging of someone else? Have I taken that sort of savior stance where I am judging somebody else in a way that might be helpful to them, or at least in my brain? Could be subtle. Or you might know someone that's been impacted by societal othering. And you might just let yourself feel what they've experienced. That impact. Or you might be considering your own impact. As a young person, I was teased a lot for my size. And just let this flow through you. And just imagine or consider your own. What triggers othering? It might just be going along with a cultural practice, or it might be a big fear, or it might just be a subconscious security issue for you. So give yourself some time to go about exploring othering in these ways. Just in a really relaxed state, because it makes it so much easier to have it come and go. And notice your emotions about it. And notice that if you are triggered further into that cycle, or if you can open up and the energy of that cycle might just dissipate. Okay, invite the people that are with me live to just stay in that place for a little bit longer. And I want to thank those of you that tuned in again very much, and for your ongoing questions and attendance and explorations with me. And so much for the kind donations we've received to keep this going. So let's close. I am with you. You are with me. Blessed be. May you all take care. Have a gentle day.